allowed us to run and do all kinds of other things, which we'll talk about in just a second here. But that uprightedness, that bipedalism, is kind of a hallmark. We see that in the development of all hominids throughout the last 4 to 8 million years. So, what does this mean? Well, you can tell this in not just humans, but all other ancestors leading to humans, is that we have a curved vertebral column. And again, we see that in all of the ancestors that led to us from this initial split between the hominids and the other apes. So, also, the spinal cord in hominids emerges from the base of the skull instead of the back of the skull, like it does in other apes. Okay, so how many known hominids are there? Well, this is kind of being questioned today, but it's somewhere between 3 and 7 species. It really depends on who you ask. Another closely related genus are the Australopithecines, and the Australopithecines, they contained about 7 species of Australopithecus. And so I'm going to show you a couple of those, and we heard about a few of those in the movie we saw last week. And so the Australopithecines, or the all of 7 of the Australopithecus species, were smaller brained, and they also existed before the Homo genus. So it's pretty clear that the Homo genus emerged from one of the Australopithecine line. And I'll kind of hint at what that is in just a second here. But there are several older lineages also. We mentioned a few in the movie, but I'll show you a slide here that contains a few other of the surviving, or I'm sorry, of the extinct genera. Now, in every case of all of these hominids, again, I just want to stress that being bipedal appears to be the defining feature, the thing that kind of separates us from the other hominoids. Okay, so this is the slide that I wanted to show you with all the various humans or human ancestors that existed in our past. So here we are way up here, Homo sapiens, and then it gives us a subspecies here, sapiens. So Homo sapiens sapiens, and all of these other Homo genera, and then leading before us were the Australopithecus. So all of the various Australopithecus genera, oh, I'm sorry, species. And then also a few others here that predate even the Australopithecus. So what are the ones here that I want you to know about? Well, this is the first one here, Australopithecus afarensis. We mentioned in the movie the name of the character in the movie, quote unquote. They named it Lucy. Well, there was a reason why they named it Lucy. I'm going to show you a picture coming up here, actually the next picture, of the first Australopithecus afarensis to be discovered by the Leakey expedition, and they named the fossil evidence Lucy. So they determined that it was a female, and they called it Lucy, and we are told the reason they called it Lucy is because Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was playing on the radio at the time. I kid you not. Okay, Homo habilis, that's another one I want you to know. Homo habilis was the first tool maker, and we know this because the first fossil evidence of Homo habilis was found with tools actually right next to their burial sites. So that's kind of cool. Now, we mentioned Australopithecus boisei in the movie as a separate lineage that didn't survive much past the changing climate, and that's primarily because they were so good at being vegetarians and eating the rough grasses, if you recall from the movie, that once conditions started changing again, they were not well adapted enough to deal with those changes. But nonetheless, they were highly successful for a very long period of time. They lived simultaneous to Homo habilis and a few other hominid genera. Okay, Homo ergaster. Homo ergaster were advanced tool users. They were able to make tools that were far more complicated than Homo habilis, and while they lived simultaneous with Homo habilis, they clearly had advantages over Homo habilis. They also are probably the species from which we get our human-like voice. They were able to make sounds and not just grunts and pitches. They were actually able to communicate with what we would recognize as a human-like voice. Then there's Homo erectus. And Homo erectus was present in Asia, but as the movie implied, and what the evidence suggests, is that Homo erectus and Homo ergaster were probably the same species. We've just given them different names because one was found in Africa and the other was found in Asia. Okay, now here's another one, Homo heidelbergensis. This is the species that we suspect invaded Europe first, and it was a direct descendant of Homo erectus or Homo ergaster. We're not quite sure on that one, but either way, it is the genus of, or the species of Homo that we find invading Europe first. Okay, then there's the Homo neanderthalensis. This was a cold-tolerant species that emerged from Homo heidelbergensis. And then there's you. And there's you. Okay. Now, Australopithecines. What are their characteristics? We know them from lots and lots of fossils. We have huge amounts of evidence of the Australopithecines. They were not very tall organisms. They were only about a meter tall, only weighed about 18 kilograms, and their brain size was that of apes. Not a hugely sophisticated hominoid relative to the later ones that emerged, but they did walk upright. Yes, and so here's a curious picture. You actually see Lucy here. These are the official Lucy bones from the American Museum of Natural History, and I have my upright hominid offspring here standing right next to Lucy, and that's an artist's rendition of what Australopithecus afarensis probably looked like. Okay, so let's get back to this issue of bipedalism. We keep talking about its importance in the hominid lineage. Well, we know that bipedalism extends back to about 400 million years ago. And you might ask yourself, well, why? Why did this emerge as the key component that defines hominid evolution? And what was going on right around 4 million years ago that made this so important? Well, for all intents and purposes, what we gather is that there was a reduction in the amount of forest covering the planet from 8 million years ago until about 4 million years ago. There was this transition so that at 4 million years ago, the predominant habitat type is grassland and open woodlands. Well, if you have open woodlands and grasslands, you're not living in trees quite as prominently. Now, there are a lot of people who try and make a connection between being bipedal and also having a big brain, and which came first. Well, we have ample evidence now to suggest that in fact bipedalism emerged before the expansion of the human brain. So something about being bipedal allowed the brain to expand in size. Okay, so why did bipedalism evolve first? Well, that's still controversial, but I want to draw you back to this picture, which I showed you in one of the earliest lectures of our class. Being bipedal means that standing in tall grass, you can actually look over the grass and you have a much better vantage point than an organism that is crawling along the ground through grass that may be 5 or 6 feet tall. So this could be one of the reasons why. Okay, now let's focus specifically on the genus Homo And we know that it evolved as a direct line from the Australopithecine ancestors somewhere around 2 million years ago. And Australopithecus afarensis is probably our direct ancestor. And so, just to summarize that same story that I had just mentioned to you, back in the 1960s, this is when hominid bones were first found in Africa with tools right next to them, stone tools. And these were not very sophisticated tools, but they were obviously tools. And we called them Homo habilis. And why Homo habilis? Well, habilis means like tool user, or one who is able to use tools, and very closely resembled Australopithecus. The difference being that its brain was about 50% larger than that of Australopithecus, which is quite a bit. That's quite impressive, actually. So this leads to Homo ergaster eventually, and remember, these guys were the ones using advanced tools and gave us our human voice. And then there's Homo erectus, which existed in Asia, but was probably just Homo ergaster, just the Asian version of it. Now, there's one more species of Homo that I would like to mention, and this is really a curious find. This is Homo floresiensis, and it was discovered in 2004, which is really quite amazing that a new species of primate, let alone a hominid, was discovered so recently off of the Flores Islands in Indonesia. And here's the kicker. The youngest fossils were well, I should say, existed up until 15,000 years ago. 15,000 years ago, humans were around. So here is a species of humanoid that was living simultaneous with the humans of 15,000 years ago. They were not as tall as humans. They were very small, diminutive in stature, I have here. And it's probably because they lived on islands. What generally happens is organisms who emigrate to islands, they eventually develop a condition of dwarfism, where you essentially grow to the size that fits your conditions. Living on an island where you have scarce resources or reduced resources, the stature that tends to do well is a dwarf stature, a smaller stature relative to your mainland ancestors. Now, what's interesting is all evidence suggests that Homo floresiensis was directly related to Homo erectus. So this is Homo erectus was probably the source that led to the founder effect, where Homo floresiensis was able to develop and then thrive. Okay, well, what about modern humans? Well, modern humans seem to have emerged somewhere in Africa sometime around 600,000 years ago. So as a species, we are not even a million years old. And there are three species that evolved during this time. Modern humans include three species. The first one here would be Homo heidelbergensis. It is the oldest of the three that we're talking about here, and they did coexist with Homo erectus, and they probably were the direct descendants of Homo erectus. Then there was Homo neanderthalensis, which was a lot shorter and stockier, basically had a build that was perfect for living in cold environments during our last ice age. And then, of course, there's us, Homo sapiens, and if you ever wondered what sapiens meant, well, the etymology of that word is wise man. So, if you consider yourself a wise person, well, now you know why.